I'm Stephanie Orell, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I'm calling self-healing. And I'm drawing from many different theorists, so I'll kind of go through some of them. But I want to say one thing about thinking about recovery from trauma. Recovery from trauma has multiple prongs to it. So it has a biological or a neurological basis, which I will talk about a little bit related to self-healing. It also has a psychological component, right? So processing through, like this happened to me, telling a story, connecting that story to meaning, dealing with maybe family relationships in relationship to how you've internalized the trauma. And then it also has a social role. So social thinking about levels of oppression, systems that perpetuate oppression or harm against certain populations, thinking about injustices or mechanisms that create inequalities in any kind of social environment. I want to make sure that we recognize all of these components, but today I want to think about what does it mean to do self-healing internally, which has to do with regulating your nervous system, but also with doing some deep care work related to the self. The idea of self-healing for me first emerged when I read Richard Molica's Healing Invisible Wounds when I was in graduate school. It's a text I actually use in my classes on scripture and trauma. And every time we get to this section of the text, the students really enjoy reading about the idea that encapsulated in the concept of self-healing that we have within us ways of working on trauma that don't involve an external source. So the idea is that internally our bodies are made to do what we would call healing work. Now, I'm going to do a later video on the concept of healing because I think on an intellectual, academic, psychological levels, there's a little bit of problems with the terms, and maybe also on a theological level. But for today, I really just want to think about the concept of our bodies being able to heal itself. So let me give you an anecdote or an example. If you cut your hand or your arm, or you break a bone, and it's set, or you clean it and bandage it, that wound will heal. Right? The skin will recover, the bone will heal together. Now, as you age, a broken bone or a joint will maybe continue to have some level of pain, like, oh, you remember, oh yeah, I broke my arm. So you may feel that over time. So the concept is it's not completely disappearing, but that it's healed to an extent that your body's repaired itself, right? So it still is something functioning. If you get knee surgery, there might always be some sensation in the knee, but the knee will recover. Like your body will regenerate cells, you will have blood flow to that joint, there will be some rehabilitation. The idea with a cut of any kind is if it goes deep enough, it's gonna leave a scar. So it'll heal itself, the cells will rejoin, the skin will create new growth, but there might be a scar. So think about that in terms of self-healing. We have these mechanisms to heal internally, especially related to trauma, but that doesn't mean that we're completely eradicating, or what Judith Herman would say, exorcising the trauma. And yet, we have internal resources that will help ourselves heal. One of the ways to think about what does it mean to say self-healing is to think about what happens in the animal world. If an animal is being hunted, but it's not going to be killed, so it's hunted, it will go into a freeze response. It will feign being dead, right? So it'll just lie on the ground, it'll get itself looking like it's dead as a way of protective mechanism so the attack from another animal stops. Great. What happens next? That animal will slowly come to and usually exhibit some kind of trembling response. If we look at it closer, it actually looks like a response of almost like a reciprocal attack. So they'll have their hands going like this, their paws, not usually hands. And there will be some kind of trembling as a terms of release of the freeze response. So all that adrenaline's gotta get out. If you've ever seen your dog like become scared by something once and kind of stop, and then they look around and kind of shake their body all out, that's the release. This gives you evidence of an internal neurological response that we have as animals ourselves that will help us recover from the flight, fight, freeze response inherent in trauma or in traumatic symptomatology. The fight, flight, freeze mechanism is the body's protective way of managing a stimulus that's too overwhelming for the system. The fact that we live through the traumatic event is evidence that we have resources in our bodies to deal with that circumstance, with that stimuli. It is similar to an animal's playing dead and then shaking out that energy and moving on. In terms of thinking about self-healing, so we have the physical, this kind of physical release. And when I've experienced it in real time, unrelated to psychological phenomenon, has been any time that I'm doing a medical procedure that is taxing. One time, for instance, at the dentist having some dental work, I just started to tremble, and the dentist asked me if something was painful, and I said, no, it's just the response I have to high stress. It's my body actually like trying to release all of that stimuli and all of that fear, really, right? So it just wants to get out of me. And afterwards, when people come out of anesthesia, this will happen a lot of times. So it's a real interesting biological phenomenon or neurological phenomenon that our body engages in to release the stress of the trauma. There are some other ways we can think about self-healing. So I've given two to start off with, this idea of a wound that we actually have that our body regenerates cells for. It's gonna help that healing process. We have this internal mechanism of release after intense fear or after aggression, which would be the fight, or after the feeling of wanting to run away from something. Our bodies can physically release that if we give it the time to do that. What that underscores is the importance of allowing our bodies to process and find some state of resourcing or regulation after we have intense stress. And I've been thinking about this in relationship to homeostasis or balance, right? So if we have a lot of stress, we have to kind of respond to that with something that's not so neurologically provocative afterwards to allow our body to get back into that state of homeostasis or regulation. Now, I want to shift gears just a little bit to think about some other ways that we can facilitate that balance. And two things I think that are really endearing that Mollica comes up with relate to what we do to our external environments and how we navigate food. External environments are incredibly important. There's so much to say about this, but let's look at it in two different ways. One, just like the animal world, I think that the natural environment outside, when we have access to it, gives us some kind of regulation, in part because the systems, the patterning, the natural elements have some reverberation with our own systems, right? So I was in a training this weekend, we were talking about the trauma vortex and the counter vortex, which has to do with like having trauma symptomatology or access to traumatic memory that stimulates us versus the oppositional kind of flow or the counter vortex where we have all the resourcing. And if we think about those organically, they kind of go together as two flows, which replicate the way a river moves and splits off, but then rejoins. So another image that they showed us this weekend had to do with waves and then the release system that I'm talking about in relationship to what your body does. So a wave will break, but it almost takes close to 38 seconds for it to really dissipate and then completely relax and go soft. So it's the same kind of reverberance that happens in our own bodies with relationship to trauma. I go back to thinking about environments. Going out into nature can help create some resonance in the neurological systems in our bodies and help with this idea of homeostasis, balance, self-healing. We don't have to stop there though. We can think about what we do in our homes and what we do in our offices in relationship to what feels soothing, healing, regulatory. Plants are really important. Plants have this kind of reverberance. And statistics have actually shown that they contribute to regulation of the nervous system. Also what we're looking at, right? So our visual stimuli, what we hear, what we smell, all of these things affect our nervous system, and they're extremely important for facilitating our body's natural way of healing itself. Moloka also looks in his text at food in 2 iterations. One, in thinking about healthy eating, which I'm not going to go into because I think everyone watching this can search the internet and find exorbitant examples of healthy eating, and it's very individual also, I think. And the second has to do with using food as a resource, relating it to positive memories or to like cultural comforts. So in his work around refugees from Cambodia, he talks about the importance of bringing some of the food that's indigenous to their culture and eating that in part of the recovery process, because it facilitates this idea of self-healing, connectedness, positive memories, etc. So if you have a cultural heritage that you can access the food from that heritage, there's probably going to be some affiliation with comfort, hopefully, and if it's not comfort, then avoid that. But if you can find access to comfort through food that's related to your culture, there may be some opportunities for self-healing there. Now, food is complex because a lot of people have issues around food or have traumatic circumstances around food, and that's something that can be discussed later in later videos. But there is also then a real intimate experience with food that I think is important to take seriously, and food has the potential to really facilitate an internal nurturing. So taking care of us, helping us heal internally, whether it's physical or psychological. And it also has the opportunity to give us real joy, especially if we think about it in terms of shared meals. For me, I'm waiting for some French toast. I do not eat French toast very usually, but I love it. And so after I do something stressful, like make a bunch of videos for you all, I really enjoy sitting down to a very good piece of French toast. So I offer you that, ways of thinking about self-healing, ways of feeding yourself, ways of facilitating your neurobiological system so that it can help you heal from traumatic experiences.